Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Today I want to discuss with you one of the most remarkable miracles that ever occurred and will never occur again. It's a one-off miracle. It's unique. It's totally different. And it's all to do with Jesus Christ. So what are we talking about? Well, as it is now Easter period, and everyone is concentrating on the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, I thought, as we've already looked at the death and burial, we'll now look at the resurrection and exactly what that meant for the church, and not only for the church, but also what miraculous occurrence occurred that makes Jesus Christ have a change of name, so he is now called the Spirit. You'll see that in Revelations, the letters to the churches, and the Spirit, it says. And at the end of Revelations, the Spirit and the church say. So, just to put that in your picture, so to speak, get it all sorted out, I want us to have a verse that we're going to use as our key verse today. It's in 1 Corinthians, it's 15, chapter 15. And the verse that we're going to look at is verse 45. But I want to read a wee bit before it. Paul is describing resurrection. And starting in verse 44, so also is the resurrection of the dead. The body is sown in corruption, is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in honor. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body, and there is a spiritual body. And here it is, this is our key verse, and so it is written. The first man, Adam, became a living being, but the last Adam became a life-giving spirit. Now, why is that important? Well, to understand the complexity of this, we need to realize that Jesus has become this. He has become a life-giving spirit. He was not a life-giving spirit prior to this. Now, this should immediately get you saying, whoa, wait, hang on a minute. What about John? He talks about Jesus in his very first gospel, and he's telling us in the Gospel of John that in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And all things were created by Jesus. It's all true. But Jesus did not have this, what we're talking about here. He was not, what's the word again? A living, you lose it when you're looking for it, right? The second man is the Lord from heaven, right? But this last Adam became a life-giving spirit. Now, the reason that's important is because this explains creation. Have you ever thought about creation? I mean, why did God make things the way he made them? Have you ever thought about it? I mean, we're told from beginning to end, nothing is impossible to God. So why did he allow things to go the way they did? I mean, why was there a need for a flood when he knew what was going to happen? Why not address it with the people? Why not teach them properly? Why not bring them to an understanding where they would have repented? Why not explain it to them so they would fully grasp it? But you see, that's the problem. This is the bit that we don't quite get our head around. God did all that, but they didn't want to believe him. That was the problem. You see, when you create, I'm speaking on behalf of God here, so I'm not taking privileges, you do appreciate. I'm merely explaining from a point of view of explanation. When you create, you have to allow that which you create autonomy to grow as you have commanded it. And that's why you give it instructions. You tell it, if it's a tree, you grow that way. You set out branches this way. You put on leaves. From the leaves, you take moisture and light so that you're nourished and you're fed, and you take water from the roots and you grow to be a strong, healthy, long-living tree that bears fruit, whatever type of tree you are, whether it's to produce wood for man or to produce beautiful furniture or beautiful carvings or something else. Whatever you are, that's what you do. But what happens if the tree decides, nah, I'm not going to do that? Well, it has to be given the ability to do that. You say, but look, come here. Trees don't really do that, you know, they can't understand us. They don't have that way of thinking. But that's where you're wrong. You see, trees hear everything that's around them. They hear if you're positive to them, and they hear if you're negative to them. Like all plants, they have spirit that has created them. And they have an element of that spirit, which is their genetic coding, which allows them to have a relationship with all the things around them. Modern science is discovering that trees can talk to each other. In some countries, there are the occasional, well, not so much trees, but bushes that can walk. They decide to uproot and head off to where there's the nearest water. Yeah, they really exist. But you see, the point is, until you see these things, you don't realize there is such a magnitude of what creation has allowed for. But it always has to be allowed freedom of choice within its own confines. Obviously, a tree will not run for president. I know some of you might think it already has, but I assure you it's not. Joking aside, everything can make mistakes and everything can sin. Because sin is when we go against what has been set aside for us, how we're to be. Now, for mankind, our sin is a little more complex because we have a lot more scope. I mean, a bird knows how to build its nest, and it'll build its nest exactly the same as every bird before it has built that nest, because it's established within the bird, this is how you build a nest. It will not change one twig or piece of moss or piece of soil at all if it can avoid it. But change its circumstances, don't give it soil, and it just doesn't build a nest. And you can go down through generations of birds where they never got to build a nest, and then release a bird again into the wild, and guess what it goes and does? It goes and builds a perfect nest. Why? Because it's programmed into it. But what about birds that don't? Every so often you'll get a bird that will just not do it. It won't go and build a nest. It won't go and link with another bird to have eggs. It won't reproduce. That bird ultimately will die. All birds die. But that dies without having fulfilled its mission, its command, what it was told to do. Jesus met a tree once. Come back to trees. This tree, he was expecting to find some fruit on it. Didn't have any fruit. Wasn't the season for fruit. But he had thought there might have been some early fruit on it. There was an expectation, but it didn't have any. It was full of leaves. It looked as if it should have had. And he spoke to the tree. And he says, no one's going to eat of your fruit ever again. He was angry with the tree. That tree died instantaneously. People say, wow, why did the tree die? Because it hadn't done what it had been told it had to do. And that was to have a small piece of fruit prepared for its creator. That was all it had to do. But it didn't do it. Now, we overlook that. We say, well, it wasn't the tree's fault. But it was. Because if it wasn't the tree's fault, then the punishment is too harsh. If you see what I mean. Then Jesus would have got angry for no reason and simply blamed someone sillily, in which case he would have sinned. And he didn't sin. So, if he didn't sin, the tree sinned. And judgment fell upon it. These are the things you have to understand. But what's that got to do with life-giving spirits? Well, let's get back to that. In the beginning, when God discussed the creation, he had a problem. If we give them free will, which they ultimately have to have, then they're going to make a mess of it. They're going to fall short. And we're going to end up sentencing them all to death. The only way around this would be for one to become as they are, live a perfect life, be betrayed by a friend, be wrongly accused, a mock trial, become a political court, and as a result, be executed. Totally innocent, and not say a thing about it. Accept it, as this has to happen. We saw that. We saw that's all that had been discussed. But let's think about this for a moment. This discussion happened before anything else. Why was it necessary? I mean, what difference does it make? Everything still is free will. What difference does it make if Jesus dies for our sins? Why is it necessary? Because he created us? Well, yes, he did. He created the whole earth. He brought everything in. The value of Jesus outvalues all creation for all time. So by taking that responsibility upon himself, he met the minimum, maximum, and middle payment. Everything, total. There was no question about the fact that he had the right to take it upon himself and pay the penalty. And that we could be released from whatever transgression, sin, or problem that we had gotten ourselves into. Remember, a big sin, notice, a big sin and a little sin are the same thing, which is why I reversed it. You've got to understand there is no such thing as that small little thing. There's only sin. And sin has one penalty. You're not worthy. Therefore, you're going to be got rid of, destroyed, cease, end, no longer be here. And why? Because like a potter throwing a pot, if it develops a crack, if it goes down, if it goes the wrong way, at certain processes, he can work with it and refashion it and make different of it. But once he's fired it, whatever it has become, whatever its character is, whatever its strength and potential is, if there's a blemish, there's nothing he can do about it. It's made its mind up, so to speak. We use that as an analogy to understand why sin is so disturbing. Because once it's there, we cannot be permanently here. We're of no value. But again, what's that got to do with Jesus having to become a life-giving spirit? Well, do you remember I told you that Jesus made everything, and I mean everything. That includes the heavenly host, all of them. The only thing that Jesus didn't bring into existence is the Father. That's quite scary. Some might argue that the Holy Spirit might also not have been brought into existence by Jesus, and that I don't disagree with. But it's the Father I want you to remember. He is always there. And here's the big question. The Father has absolutely no, now think about this, no input into the creative energies that Jesus used to bring about everything that exists. In other words, the Father didn't say, I'll make this wee bit. Because the Bible's clear. Jesus made it all. Let's look at that thing in John for a moment. Hang on, you've been there. John, the Gospel, chapter 1, tells us all about this. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through Him. This is verse 3. Without Him, nothing was made that was made. That means He had to be involved in every aspect of it. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Now, Jesus did the creating. All of it. Including the angels. But guess what happened? Something went wrong with some of the angels. Some of the angels rebelled. Now, think for a moment. These are creatures made of spirit. And yet, iniquity was found in some of them. And that leaves a doubt concerning the rest of them. But God already knew that before they had been brought into being. He'd already examined that. He had already looked at that. So He had explained something at the very beginning. For us to perform what we aim to do, it's going to be necessary for you to become a life-giving spirit. This is different. Here we're told, in Him was life. Remember John's telling us, in Him was life. And that life was the light of men. In other words, all of creation Jesus had done because of who He is. But there was still something He couldn't do. And that was, He couldn't create a being perfectly balanced between the physical and the spiritual that was sinless at this point in time. That would require another stage. And this is what had to be discussed. So when we look at that early discussion before creation, we have to look at it with new eyes. We have to understand something. God is not telling Jesus that when and if man sins, He will maybe have to, on the possibility, if it comes worst case scenario type thing. That wasn't the conversation. The conversation from the very beginning is, this is necessary. And before you make Adam, before we bring angels into being, before anything of the physical universe exists, this has to be decided. You have to become the life-giving spirit. The spirit that gives life to other spirits. Why? I keep asking that question. I'm going to give you the answer. Here's why. When Jesus was teaching and guiding and directing people on the earth for 3.5 years, He kept getting accused of a terrible, terrible thing. He was being accused of being like God, making Himself equal with God. because he called himself the Son of God, and he called God his Father. Now, it's very important that we understand this. Jesus maintained that every single thing he did was on the direct authority of his Father, and as he heard the Father speak, so he spoke. As he saw the Father do, so he did. And he is the direct reflection of everything the Father does. Do we understand? Jesus is perfect. He will not, cannot sin. He is the one you want to make perfect beings out of. That's why it was necessary for him to be there. He has to become their Father. But hold on. The Bible tells us he's our older brother. How do we work that out? Well, you see, God has a wonderful way of telling us things through the stories of the Bible. He wants us to understand they're not just there to fill up the pages. They're there to teach us spiritual things. And one of them has to do with Israel and Joseph. When Joseph presented his two sons to Israel, his father, that's Jacob, guess what he did? He adopted them. He adopted them to be his sons. Now, we think, well, it's a wee bit strange. Was he not happy enough to be a grandparent? But what he was giving them was something far greater. But what, from a legal standpoint, had occurred was that Joseph, their biological father, had now become an older brother to them. From a legal standpoint. Jesus is our legal elder brother, but he is our, what's the word, progenitor? Yeah. The one who created us, brought us, formed us, made us. He's our daddy. We get that, don't we? We understand. Our life comes from Jesus. It doesn't come from anyone else. It's not from God the Father. It's from Jesus. But he's our elder brother because the Father adopted us. That seemed a good idea at the time, didn't it? Yeah. Except when you read when he did it, he didn't do it after we were made. He did it back at the beginning, at the very beginning. He adopted us and recorded us in his book of life so that each one of us would be known and understood, that we would have eternal life. That's some claim, but it's also what God formed and did. So when you look at the resurrection, remember something happened here that has startled the world, but it startled more than the world. Do you remember in Genesis, there was a little incident with a serpent. And that serpent kind of got in the wrong side of God. So God told it a story. The seed of the woman is going to be at enmity with you, and you're going to be at enmity with it. You will bruise his heel, but he will bust your head right open. What happened when Jesus rose from the dead? Well, the Bible tells us he took captivity captive. He released the captives, he released the prisoners. He defeated Satan, the power of darkness, the grave, death. It all came tumbling down. And that was the message the church began to teach and guide and tell people all over the world. This was not a religion. This was a complete takeover of all the principalities and powers that existed on the earth. Everywhere mankind was, the gospel, the good news, the wonderful announcement about Jesus Christ had to go forth. And that was the church's job. And she did it. And has been doing it for 2,000 years in one form or another. But guess what? It's an announcement of a future event. And the future event is all going to happen at the one time. Christ is the first fruit. He is the first fruit of a new creation. He is both God and man. He is complete. Do you remember we mentioned those angels that rebelled? In Genesis, we find there's a wee story about some of those angels that rebelled. Some of them got it into their idea that maybe it would be a good idea for them to be able to come down, talk to some ladies, get married, and have kids of their own. Problem was, they were breaking a rule. How do we know about this rule? Up until this part in the Bible, the rule has not been formed, or at least we don't know about it. But we know about the rule because Jesus tells us about the rule many centuries later. He's talking to some Sadducees. They have posed a question. There was a man who had a lot of brothers. He got married. He died. No children. Wife passed on to the next son. His brother. He died. No children. So this process continued. There were 7 of them all together, and end up the woman dies. Whose wife is she at the end? Jesus' response to them. Now he's addressing a question, but he's also requesting an error in their thinking. First thing he says is, those who are to be of the resurrection. In other words, those who are honored of being of the resurrection. The privilege. Them, they will not be given in marriage, nor taken in marriage. They will be like the angels. Now in Jude we're told that the angels had left their first estate, which meant they had left what they had been told they were to do and did something else. But in Genesis, we're told what it was. They saw the daughters of men and married them and had children by them. So in those 3 things we see, angels aren't to get married. They got married. That's what they'd done wrong. Jude tells us they left their first estate, which meant that we know that it's the angels who did it and not the descendants of Shem or somebody else from Adam's line. The whole point is, we know that this was an angelic situation. And we know that the offspring of these angels, while destroyed in the flood, their spirits were alive because they were angelic. They were hybrid. They weren't like humans. They had bodies, but once they died, the spirit lived on. And that was part of the problem. You see, if God had made you a being that could exist, then he would have to make you spiritually alive to exist forever. But he didn't. He made you a living soul, an intelligent being, but with a limited battery life. And the reason he made you with a limited battery life is because if you sinned, you could die. And if you died, it was your end. It finished. You weren't prolonging your agony, so to speak. Because the ultimate problem with sin is it cuts you off from life. Imagine being alive and understanding that. This is why some people prefer the death penalty to being given a life sentence in jail. And many of them will kill themselves in prison because the thought of being 30, 40, 50 years locked up just is beyond their thing. Imagine if you're not talking years. Imagine if when you wake up after being dead and become aware that you still have awareness, and you discover that you can't eat, you can't feel, you can't touch, you can't see, you can do nothing. Because all these things belong to a body, and it's not looking well. What are you going to do? Well, Jesus told us what they did. They became unclean spirits that infested people and began to live within people. They began to influence people, and they brought with them mental health difficulties, disease, sickness. They brought all forms of addiction and problems because that's their nature. That's what they were like. That's what they are. These were created because of a rebellion of angels that were destroyed in the flood. And they will remain until they are dealt with. And they know that they have a limited lifespan. Because when they saw Jesus, they accused him of something very, very important. Have you come to judge us and deal with us before the allotted time? That means they knew. So they're carrying the fact that while they're trapped in the earth and interacting with people through different ways, they're also in total sorrow, anguish, and pain. And that's what a spirit being without a proper body and without a proper means of existence is like. So why did God make you physical? Because he loves you. He didn't want you to have that. Because if you chose not to participate with him in this wonderful adventure of life, that's your option. He's not holding you or making you go anywhere else. He will talk with you. He will describe it to you. He will give you every opportunity to understand the truth, but he will not make you obey him. That's the point. So if you choose to, then that's when we need a life-giving spirit. Because then, notice, you've accepted Jesus Christ, but yet when you die, you stay in the grave. Paul, Peter, John, James, all the apostles, all that early church, 2,000 years old, all the prophets from way before them are still in their graves. Jesus told us Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are still in their graves. David is still in his grave. We're told these things. They haven't seen a resurrection. And so we also wait for the resurrection. And Paul highlights to us with great urgency. Don't worry about it, by the way, if you haven't got round to dying before he comes, because at that instance, you'll change. You're not going to be left out. You'll change. He was expecting it rather quicker than it actually is happening. But it's worth noting. Through Jesus Christ, we have the Spirit of life. And when he calls, that new life that fills our bodies, that new existence, is not soul-based. It's spirit-based. We have a physical presence. We have physical bodies. We can enjoy the same physical things like food, taste, touch, all of these things, because Jesus revealed that to us when he was resurrected. He shared what we would see and be like, because that's what he is like. The only difference, you will not, and I assure you, you will not be a life-giving spirit. Only Jesus is. He's unique. Remember that. Only Jesus is. And that's what we should be thinking about as we approach the resurrection. Thank you.